Hi guys, welcome to today's live session. Last week we had our first live session on employment law in Kenya, and in today's session we're going to be focusing on the topic of constructive dismissal. Out of this topic of constructive dismissal, I want us to understand a few questions. What constitutes constructive dismissal? And the things that an employee needs to prove before a court of law so that they can win a case on constructive dismissal. So I'll just do a short presentation on what this term means according to the Employment Act of Kenya. Then I'll take in a few questions and we close the session within 20 minutes. So just an outline, we are going to be looking at how does constructive dismissal take place at the workplace. Then we're going to discuss about the options that exist for employees in case they're subjected to a terrible working environment and they choose to resign. Then we are going to look at the requirements or the things that an employee is required to prove before a court of law so that they can win a case on constructive dismissal. Remember that if you resign based on constructive dismissal, then you'll be entitled to compensation. In the last part of this presentation, I'll give you two key cases that you can read so that you understand the context of constructive dismissal in the Kenyan context. Thank you, everyone. For those who are here with me, I appreciate it. So to begin with, it's already 8, so I'll start. What constructive dismissal means is that a person can be employed. Once you're employed, then your employer starts subjecting you to conditions that will actually force you to resign. And some of these conditions could be that maybe your employer has not paid you for a period of 6 months. You can imagine you'll be forced to resign from your employment. And the other reason could be that maybe you're being subjected to sexual harassment in the workplace and the employer is doing nothing about it, and you go ahead to resign. Also, one of the examples could be that your employer continuously frustrates you at the workplace. So then you're left with no option but to leave and go look for employment elsewhere. So when this happens, upon leaving, you must actually write a resignation letter, because if you just walk away, that will be considered absconding duty. And remember, according to Section 44 Employment Act of Kenya, there are certain things that amount to gross misconduct of an employee, and one of them is absconding duty, meaning that you just leave the workplace the way you want, or in case you show up at the workplace drunk. But for the context of Section 44, I'll be discussing that further in more videos to come. I want us to focus on constructive dismissal. So before you actually resign because the employer has made the work environment unbearable for you, number one, you should actually write a resignation letter and state the reason why you're leaving. Now, when this happens, over and above that, now you can go and approach the court and sue your employer for constructive dismissal, because you left your employment as a result of the intolerable work environment that was subjected to you by your employer. Remember that your employer is supposed to actually take care of you and provide a favorable work environment. And so if it so happens that even your colleagues at the workplace are the ones mistreating you under the watch of your employer, then that also will amount to constructive dismissal when you resign. So the other thing we need to understand as far as this topic is concerned is that some of the things that you need to prove before a court of law is that you must actually show that the work environment became so unbearable. Now, under termination of employment, it is the responsibility of an employer to actually come and provide the reason for termination, and also give you notice as an employee. But when it comes to constructive dismissal, the burden is on you as an employee to actually prove that indeed the work environment became so terrible for you that you could not continue. So one thing also you need to remember that this will amount to you being paid compensation. And if you want to understand this topic further in the Kenyan context, please check out the case of Coca-Cola East Africa. Check out the case of Coca-Cola East and Central Africa. versus Maria. Now, this case explains what constructive dismissal is, and if you're a law student, it gives you so much context to this specific topic. Now, this brings us to the end of this particular topic of constructive dismissal. Remember, once the work environment is terrible for you and you have evidence, so get the evidence. Show that you've been trying to reach out to your employer. Show that you've been trying to email your employer asking for your salary. These records are the ones that will save you in the event that you choose to resign. Later, you want to sue your employer for constructive dismissal. So this was a specific topic of discussion, this video, and it ends there. And just to remind you, again, you need to understand what constitutes termination, what constitutes summary dismissal, now constructive dismissal. These are very different things. And if you want to understand what constitutes termination according to the Employment Act of Kenya, then please refer to sections 41 of the Employment Act of Kenya. We have sections 41, sections 35, section 45, we have 44. Those are very key sections, especially for someone who is an employment environment. And in the previous video I did on Nairobi Legal Insights, it touched on termination from employment, basically what constitutes unfair termination. Yeah. Remember that before your employer actually tells you to leave the workplace, they must give you a reason, yeah, why they're terminating your contract, and the procedure also must be followed, meaning that if you are employed and you have an employment contract, then you receive a phone call from your employer telling you, don't show up to work anymore, I don't need you anymore. That constitutes unfair termination because within the meaning of the sections I've mentioned earlier, you must be given a reason for termination and you must be given a fair hearing. So even if you are an employee who is a drunkard and you show up to work drunk all the time, it doesn't matter the behavior that you depict. You must be given a fair hearing. And absence of a fair hearing will amount to unfair and unlawful termination. The other thing you need to take note of is that also as you are at the workplace, as an employee, or as a student who is looking at a question of employment law, you need to understand that this employer-employee relationship is not balanced. Much as the Employment Act of Kenya 2007 came in to actually bring about equality between employers and employees, what happens in practice is that if today I want to leave my employer as an employee, all I need to give my employer is notice that I will be leaving maybe next month. While on the other side, to show you that employees are better placed, an employer cannot easily get rid of his employee because they will be required to provide a reason for termination of that contract, and they will be required to give notice, you see, and that reason has to be fair, yeah, according to the Employment Act of Kenya. You see, this description I just gave you shows that employees tend to have an upper hand, yeah, or an upper position, or they're more favored as far as the Employment Act of Kenya 2007 is concerned. Because on one side, employers give both reasons for termination, they must also give notice, while employees simply give notice, meaning that if you find a better job, all you need to do is give notice and leave. On the other side, the employer cannot easily get rid of his employee because in most cases, when an employer sends a notice to get rid of an employee, they end up in court because the reason the employer must rely on should actually be lawful within the meaning of the Employment Act of Kenya 2007. So I was trying to just bring out the discussion and the distinction between termination, employment, constructive dismissal. The liability to prove termination of employment or to meet the threshold of termination of employment is the employer as far as termination is concerned. While when it comes to constructive dismissal, you as an employee must actually prove that the work environment was not bearable, and that evidence is what the court will use. Now, thank you so much again for tuning in live. It is the second one, and I'm so happy to be with you. looking forward to more sessions. I will be doing one last session on labor law in Kenya. Then I can move into other interesting topics based on your suggestions. I can see a question here. Is there a way to resolve the situation without legal action? So what happens is that sometimes your employer can choose to frustrate you so that you leave. And they think it is normal for you to just leave like that. In the sense that I can refuse to pay you and I tell you there's no money, or I can basically, maybe I can become so abusive. Maybe I could be, as an employer, could be your manager, your supervisor at the place of employment could be sexually harassing you. And in that case, they are making the work environment unbearable. You see, even when this is happening, your employer does not take any action. So as a human being, as an employee, you end up choosing to actually walk away. Yeah. So in that particular instance, there is no alternative to resolving this because you're already fed up and you want to leave that place. But when you leave, remember, defense is constructive dismissal if you have the evidence of the things that have been occurring within the organization. So that I guess that answers that this specific question, the chat box. So in more videos to come, this again being our second session, I will be reaching out to you to suggest topics of interest because I want to grow this over time. I want you to be able to understand these legal concepts because they're not easy to understand. Today, I chose to give a person without legal background the Act of Kenya to read for themselves. It's a bit complicated. And what I do at Nairobi Legal Insights is to break things down for you so that you understand them very well in simple and concise manner. Now, in case you have any questions, please drop them. I'll be able to read through them and then respond to you. But thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it and take it for granted. So in about 5 minutes, we'll be finalizing. In case you have any questions, and if you feel like your question might not be in line with what I discussed today, it is also welcome. It could be from a different area of law, which is not necessarily labor law. And I can be able to answer that in the meantime. Also, again, in case you're watching this for the first time, remember to check out our different sections on our Legal Insights. We've done quite a number of videos on various areas of law. Thank you for your time. Now, just to add on to the discussion I have had today, remember that before you leave the workplace, always record, use formal communication. If it's an email, it's very important. If you're having any communication at the workplace, keep it to the email because when it comes to any labor law disputes, it's the email that will save you. You've been taken maybe advantage of, or if you've been mistreated and you have a record of that because the court operates with evidence. And in court, we have evidence that is admissible and evidence that is inadmissible. So it's very critical that you need to keep the records in form of email, communicate based on email. That comes the event that you have disputes, because again, you can't rely on oral communication to justify whatever happened to you. So I'm seeing another question here. If you're unfairly dismissed by your employer and you take legal action against them, what are the remedies available to you? Now, under unfair termination, remember that your employer must give you a reason for termination and notice for termination. But even if the reason is valid, but due process has not been followed, your employer sacked you over a WhatsApp text and told you never come back, that is unlawful because they've not given you a fair hearing. In this case, you'll be compensated. Let's say you'll be actually paid also for the time. Let's say you are terminated 3 months ago unfairly, and you've gone to court after these 3 months. You'll be actually paid for that period for which you are at home. That will be paid for. And again, to give you the breakdown and the details of what compensation is available to you. I will be able to, again, do a detailed discussion on this because there are several kind of compensation you can get in form of damages. You can be paid based on the number of years you've worked for that employer and the percentage according to the Employment Act of Kenya. So to bring in the specifics of the percentages and the damages and the monetary compensation again to be given to you, I'll do a video to break down that because it's a series of several things that you can claim in the event that you are unfairly dismissed. Remember here, you're leaving your employer permanently. So if you've been working with them for over 10 years, then there's a percentage, they're going to compensate you for even those years that you've been working, and there's a percentage that is worked out in the Employment Act of Kenya, which I'll be working on and share with you. So the other thing you need to remember also is that when it comes to issues of employment, and this is over and above what I was discussing today, especially when you're given an employment contract, because I can imagine if you're not from a legal background and you have an employment contract, sometimes what you focus on is the money, the salary, you forget about the different provisions in that contract. So it is good for you to read that contract from the beginning to the end, and where you can't understand, then look for someone who can actually understand each and every section of that particular employment contract. You need to remember that employers at times may put certain rules or certain restrictions within that contract that do not comply with the law. Yeah. Remember, you're required to go on maternity leave, you're required to go on sick leave, you're required to go for paternity leave if you're a gentleman. All these things are provided for by law, and there is nowhere your employer can take away these rights. You have rights and duties as an employee. And these rights, once a right is within the context of the Employment Act of Kenya, not even your employer can take it away from you. Meaning that should your employer try to tell you, look, maternity leave, according to the Employment Act of Kenya, is supposed to be 3 months, and the employer is telling you, please, we're giving you 1 month. If you do not want the 1 month, then don't come back. That is already something that is unlawful because it is not within the meaning of the Employment Act of Kenya. And I will be doing a video on the specific rights and duties of employees that you need to understand so that when you read through that employment contract that has been handed over to you, you're in a position to know that this might be written here, I might be signing this contract, but it will never apply. You highlight it and know that your employer is just trying to play games with you. Also, when it comes to employment and termination, again, just to add on to the question that have been asked, sometimes employers may trick you and they tell you, come sign this discharge form so that you can live in peace. We are going to pay you for the remaining number of months, sign here and then leave. Now, even if this happens and you sign that form, even if the employer brings it to court in the event that you go and sue, that form will not actually be acceptable because still the employer has an obligation to follow the requirements set out in the Employment Act of Kenya. So those tricks that are used by employers, they're just sometimes created to instill fear in people, but according to the law, they will not apply anywhere. And this is why it's very important for you to understand labor laws and in Kenya, so that each and every time you're in a situation, you know exactly what to do and you know where to go. So the next question is that in a case where a gentleman has married 2 wives under customary, in the case where a gentleman has married 2 wives under customary law and they're pregnant and due around the same period, does the male employee take 2 paternity leaves or take 1 to apply? Wow, this is very interesting. I've never thought about this. I think the assumption in the Marriage Act, the assumption in the Employment Act normally is that you're married to 1 wife. I mean, I've never thought about actually Muslims, because you can imagine a Muslim has about 4 wives. So if you're taking paternity leave, how are you going to share it amongst the 4 wives? So this is a very interesting question, and I'm actually going to look much more into this. I'll be able to pick out the specific provision of the Employment Act of Kenya that speaks to paternity leave and examine it in the context of this question. I should admit indeed that this is something I never anticipated. And I will be reviewing it and I'll give you an answer through probably a short video on Nairobi Legal Insights and the labor law section. So I assume this is only applicable with legally registered businesses. So basically, by the way, as you've seen on Nairobi Legal Insights, we have disclaimers on all our content. Our content is for educational purposes. Our content is meant for students, but anyone interested can come and review it. Also, you need to remember our content is not content that is portraying legal advice to anyone. This is freedom of expression in terms of opinion and sharing knowledge. So each of our videos actually have disclaimers when it comes to the content that we produce. So we are not proclaiming to be advocates trying to provide legal information to the general public. This is very specific under all the videos that we produce. Thank you for that question. So I think we have about 2 minutes to finish. Thank you for everyone who logged in today. Don't forget to subscribe, to comment on the different videos so that I get to know your feedback, and also anything that I might need to improve on. I will be very happy to work on that. Remember, this is a student-centered platform. We're here to learn from each other. We're not here to prove that we know things, but to share our opinions according to what we have learned along the way. And thank you for tuning in for today. See you next time.